867 AD York, England. A Scandinavian king named King of Northumbria is captured by a Viking army that has been hunting him for years. What happens next is recorded in multiple independent medieval sources across 3 different countries, written in 3 different languages over the span of 2 centuries. According to those sources, they cut him open while he was still alive. They pulled his lungs out through his back, and they spread them like wings. But here's the question that has consumed historians, forensic anthropologists, and Viking scholars for the last 40 years. Did this actually happen? Or did an entire civilization just invent the most horrifying execution in recorded history? The answer changes everything we think we know about the Vikings. The primary sources for this story are the Orkneyinga saga, the Ragnar saga Lubrakar, and the Islendingabok tradition, supplemented by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which records Glah's death independently, without the ritual detail. Scholars including Roberta Frank of Yale University, and more recently, Alexandros Sandmark of the University of the Highlands have spent careers tearing this question apart. Today you're going to discover 3 things. First, the exact textual evidence for the blood eagle, and the specific word in Old Norse that changes what every translation you've ever read actually means. Second, the forensic and archaeological evidence that either confirms or destroys the ritual's existence. And third, the genuinely disturbing reason this debate matters far beyond Viking history. The documents are real. The disagreement is real. Let's go. To understand who ordered this alleged execution, you need to understand Ragnar Lothbrok, and you need to immediately separate the man from the myth, because they are not the same person. The historical Ragnar is referenced in Frankish annals from the 840s, a Viking chieftain who raided Paris in 845 AD, extracted 7,000 pounds of silver from the Frankish king Charles the Bald, and by all contemporary accounts died sometime in the 860s. How he died is where the record gets contested. The sagas, written down in Iceland between 200 and 400 years after his death, claim that King of Northumbria captured Ragnar and threw him into a pit of snakes. And here is where you need to stop and register what that means for the evidence chain. The blood eagle, performed allegedly by Ragnar's sons in revenge, is documented in sources written centuries after the event by Icelandic monks who had never been to York, recording oral traditions about a man whose very historicity is still debated. That's the evidentiary problem. But it is not the end of the story. Because Roberta Frank, and this is the turning point, didn't just attack the sources, she attacked the language. In her 1984 paper, published in Medieval Scandinavia, Frank made an argument so precise it stopped the academic conversation cold for nearly a decade. The Old Norse phrase used in the primary saga accounts is rustablóðurinn, literally, to carve the blood eagle. Frank's argument was that this phrase is not a description of a surgical procedure. It is a skaldic poetic kenning. A kenning, in Old Norse literary tradition, is a compressed metaphor. Whale road means the sea. Battle-dew means blood. Frank argued that carving the blood eagle meant leaving a body for eagles to feed on, a battlefield image, a poetic expression of total defeat, not a literal anatomical ritual. And her secondary argument was even more devastating: the detailed step-by-step descriptions of the ritual. The incisions along the spine, the separation of the ribs, the extraction of the lungs appear later in the textual tradition. The earliest mentions are vague. The graphic details accumulate over centuries, which is exactly what you would expect from legend inflation, not from accurate historical memory. This is the yes but ... structure of the entire historical debate. Yes, multiple sources mention it, but those sources get progressively more detailed the further they are from the event. Yes, it appears in the historical record, but the word at the center of the account might not mean what we've assumed it means for 200 years. But here's where the newly examined archaeological and forensic evidence enters the frame, and the problem becomes much worse for the skeptics than anyone expected. In 2017, Scholars Luke John Murphy and Lasek Gardewa published a systematic review of the archaeological and textual evidence in the journal Viking and Medieval Scandinavia. Their conclusion was more uncomfortable than either side of the debate wanted. The skeletal evidence from Viking Age mass graves shows something specific. There are documented cases of paramortem, meaning at the time of death manipulations of human remains that go far beyond simple execution. At the site of Ridgeway Hill in Dorset, a mass grave dated to around 1000 AD contained 54 decapitated Viking men. The decapitation happened while they were alive. The heads were removed as a group, stacked separately. This is not battlefield pragmatism, this is ritual. And then there is the Reginsmal, an Eddic poem in the Codex Regius, the most important single manuscript of Old Norse poetry, dated to approximately 1270, which references the killing of Halfdan, using the phrase in a context that strongly implies a physical act performed on the body, not a metaphor for battlefield carrion. The forensic anthropologist and bioarchaeologist Philippa Walton, writing for the British Museum Research Publications, noted in her analysis of Iron Age and early medieval British remains that ritual mutilation of the torso, specifically the posterior thoracic region, is not without archaeological parallel in pre-Christian Northern European contexts. It doesn't confirm the blood eagle, but it removes the argument that such a thing is anatomically impossible or culturally inconceivable. We do not know what Ivar the Boneless, the son attributed with ordering Glaea's execution, was thinking in that moment. We don't even know with certainty whether Ivar the Boneless was one person or a composite of multiple historical figures. But we do know what the Northumbrian sources record next. Glae is dead. The great heathen army controls York, and the political map of England is permanently altered. Whatever happened to Glaea's body cost the Kingdom of Northumbria its existence. For decades, the default academic position, especially in popular history, was that the blood eagle was a medieval Christian propaganda invention. Writings centuries later wanted to portray the Vikings as uniquely savage. The blood eagle was the perfect narrative tool, a fabricated atrocity designed to justify crusading violence and frame pagan Northmen as subhuman. That argument has a serious problem that emerged in 2002 when scholars examined the Agrip F. Norragskongasham, the summary of the sagas of the kings of Norway, one of the oldest surviving prose texts in Old Norse, dated to approximately 1190. This text, written by a Norwegian author almost certainly not under direct ecclesiastical influence in the same manner as later Icelandic manuscripts, contains a reference to the ritual in connection with Halfdan Longlegs, executed by the Norwegian king Harald Fairhair. This is not Glae's execution. This is a completely separate account in an older source, naming a different victim, in a different country, attributed to a different king. The propaganda fabrication theory requires you to explain why two independent textual traditions, separated by geography and decades, both arrive at the same specific ritual. That is not impossible. Shared oral tradition is a legitimate explanation. But it is no longer as simple as Christian monks invented a monster. Roberta Frank's 1984 paper remains the most cited scholarly work on this question. But Frank herself, in a 2003 lecture at the University of Toronto, acknowledged that the question was not closed. She called it, and this is a direct quote from her recorded remarks, a problem that keeps refusing to stay solved. Ivar the Boneless disappears from the historical record around 873 AD. The Annals of Ulster record the death of Emer, king of the Northmen of all Ireland and Britain, in 873, which many scholars identify as the same figure. He died, by that account, of natural causes, which given the violence of his documented career, is genuinely remarkable. Glae of Northumbria left no surviving dynasty. The Kingdom of Northumbria fractured. York became the Viking capital of England, Jorvik, remained under Scandinavian political control until 954 AD, when Eric Bloodaxe, the last Viking king of York, was killed at the Battle of Stainmoor. His death is, incidentally, also described in the sagas with ritual overtones, though without the specific blood eagle terminology. The modern legacy is not decorative. The debate over the blood eagle has become a case study in what historians call source criticism under political pressure. The Viking Age has been appropriated by white nationalist movements in the United States and Europe since at least the 1990s. A fact documented by the FBI, by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and by historians including Neil Price of Uppsala University, who has spoken directly about this in public forums and academic papers. The same symbols, the same mythology, the same curated image of Viking violence is being used to construct a specific political identity. And the blood eagle sits at the center of that image. When you accept it uncritically, you accept a specific narrative of Viking identity. Maximally brutal, maximally savage. When you dismiss it entirely, you erase a genuine historical debate and replace it with a different kind of mythology. Sanitized, comfortable, equally false. Here is what the record actually leaves us with. There's a mass burial site outside York, excavated in the 19th century and re-examined in the 20th, containing human remains dated to the Viking Age, with perimortem trauma to the posterior thorax, the back, the ribs, the area the ritual specifically describes. The remains were not well documented during the original excavation. Some were lost. The chain of custody for the physical evidence is incomplete. We will probably never know exactly what happened to King of Northumbria in 867 AD. But here is the question that should keep you awake. The sources that describe the blood eagle also describe Ragnar Lothbrok dying in a snake pit, Odin sacrificing himself to himself, and ships crewed by the dead sailing toward the end of the world. Every single one of those accounts comes from the same manuscript tradition. Scholars routinely treat one as myth and another as history. How do you decide which is which? And who decided for you? The sources are in the description. Fact-check every claim made in this video. That is not a suggestion. This is Blood and Empire. We'll see you in the next one.